Hey, so if you're interested in not just growing your business, but actually scaling it to the point to where it actually outgrows you, then I think this is a good book to read. This book is called 10x is Easier Than 2x. It's by Dan Sullivan and Dr. Benjamin Hardy. They've written a couple books together, but today we're going to review 10x is Easier Than 2x. So let's jump in. So a couple things to keep in mind. My three key takeaways first are focusing on the 20%, not the 80%. And what they mean by that is, the author talks about standards and raising your floor. And he kind of talks about that once you raise your floor, the ceiling will start to kind of raise itself. And so one of the things he talks about is actually better precedes bigger, meaning that once you raise your standards and perform the work in a better way or better fashion, then that's when you'll start to see the bigger results and the bigger outcomes. So he also talks about when you can make your goals impossibly high, it actually narrows down the number of ways that you can go get there. So if your goal is just to do twice as many, whatever your thing is, so grow your business twice as many clients or double the revenue, there's a lot of different ways to do that, right? Sometimes it's even just taking the same things you're doing today and just doing it more of it, right? But if you're trying to 10x those things, now you really narrow those things down, and it forces you to be a little more selective about how you spend your time and your energy. And by doing that, that's just what forces you to kind of set a higher standard, a higher bar for the types of activities that you invest in, right? Um, this also means that you're operating from your future self, not your past self. So again, it talks about, 2x is about taking the same things that you've been doing and just figuring out how to do more of them, maybe be more efficient. But figuring out how to go 10x requires completely reimagining the approach. So to do that, you have to build a vision of who you want to be, that future self, and then you have to work your way backwards from there. And so again, kind of goes to saying those impossibly high standards, narrowing down the number of activities or the types of actions that can get you there, and then just really focusing on those as opposed to the idea of, hey, what got me here, it has been working so far. If it's not broke, don't fix it. We're just going to keep, kind of refining these tactics that we're already doing. And so that kind of comes to this third point of it's going to be scary, right? So to go 10x and to really commit to that, focusing on that 20%, it's going to require a commitment. It's going to require committing to being that future self and not just letting that past self identify who your present is. And so what I mean by that is kind of letting go of those things that got you here, and to some extent kind of shedding part of your personality. Again, remember, if we're kind of talking about that 80-20 rule and you're focusing on that 20%, that means looking at that 80% of those things and saying, hey, maybe these aren't working for me anymore. We're going to let go of some of these things. And ultimately it's going to require a little bit of a leap of faith. And so focusing on the 20%, not the 80, it means that kind of that Pareto principle, right? 80% of the results are from 20% of the actions. We want to focus on those 20% and not just do more of that 20%, but actually get better at that 20%. So it's a qualitative leap, not a quantitative leap. So next thing that we're going to focus on, or my next little takeaway, is the who, not how. So diving into that, once you identify that 80%, you want to delegate or automate as much of that stuff as possible. Get it off your plate, allow someone else to go do those things, and free you up to go focus on that 20% that's going to generate the majority of your results. What you want to do though, is whoever you delegate that to, you want to give them some autonomy, right? So it's going to require trust, which kind of goes back to that. It's going to be scary. It's going to require a leap of faith, but you want to trust that person. And to get the most motivation out of a person, they need to feel like they can completely own how they do the work. And so that gets a lot easier if you've picked the right who. So if you've picked the right who, you can trust them to figure out the how. And then you just kind of need to let go and give them their space to own and manage and make sure they're executing that part of your business. If you don't do that, you can become a bottleneck, right? And so if you've gone through the effort of hiring this person, this who, to take care of this how, but then they still have to run every single decision by you, you really haven't taken yourself out of that part of the business. You haven't given them the full autonomy to really own that process. And it's going to be much harder to grow and scale. You're staying in that 80%. You're just kind of coming at it from a different angle. And by delegating that 80%, focusing on your 20%, that's going to give you some space to get into the flow. And so this is that kind of imaginative space where you can just get in the zone and go to work, man. So getting in the zone, if you can't get into the zone if you're constantly putting out fires or involving yourself in every single decision that needs to be made. And again, that comes with being able to trust the person that you've hired to do that work. Um, and this is where the 10x transformations can really start take shape, because this is how you can buy the time to focus on the quality of your work and really mastering that 20%. So again, if your goal is to identify the 20% versus the 80%, really focus on that 20%, you want to dive as deep into that as possible. You really want to master it and again, raise those standards and see some qualitative gains. Can't do that if you're constantly getting pulled aside, like, hey, can you approve this? Am I doing this right? Or just involving yourself in that 80%. You want to get into a space creatively, imaginatively, whatever, where you can just really dive into that work and really start to see some growth in terms of the quality of it. So next one, repeat, right? So it sounds a little simple, but takeaways there are, once you focus and hone in on that 20%, eventually a new 80% is going to emerge. So you get that much better at your 20% that, some of that stuff can now be delegated, can be kind of, trusted to some of your team. So that's the part that you want to keep repeating. So you identify the 20, you really focus yourself and hone in on that. A new 80% is going to emerge. Go ahead and delegate that to your team, or automate it, or come up with some systems to take care of those for you. Take that off your plate. There's a new 20%. Focus on that. Deep dive in. Again, another 80% is going to emerge, and you get the point. You just keep repeating the process. So all along the way, you're going to continue to raise your standards. So this can mean a lot of different things. Obviously, it means raising the standards for your own work and your own level of mastery, because every time you take that 10x leap, it needs to be qualitative in nature, which is going to require raising your own standards for your own performance. But it can also be okay to raise the standards for your team. As your business grows, as you're giving more work, as you're giving them more autonomy, it is okay to expect more. Now, don't be a dick about it. Like, if you're going to expect more, you need to pay them more. But as long as you feel like you're getting a good value for that return, then they're going to be a good fit. If it gets to a point where someone on your team just isn't able to deliver at this new level of quality that you're expecting, it is okay to kind of upgrade from there and say, hey, you've done a good job, you've gotten us here, but we're gonna look for someone with a higher standard to get us there. And of course, this is kind of you're going to get what you pay for type of thing. So again, higher standards, you're probably going to pay a little more for the people that you're trusting to help with that 80% of your business. It can also mean raising the standards for the types of work that you bring in, the types of clients you take on as well. It could potentially mean raising your rates, right? So, if you were a consultant billing it, call it $50 an hour, and you're developing another level of mastery after another level of mastery, it's okay to start raising those rates to $80 an hour, $150 an hour, and so on. That also means that you're going to kind of disqualify yourself from some clients where that's not in their budget. So that means that you're going to be more selective and have a higher standard about the types of clients that you bring on, which is also going to take on an entirely different standard of the work that you're expected to perform. So, and this is ultimately where that exponential growth is created, not the linear growth. So the linear growth is where you're going 2x. So it's looking at the past and saying, what have we done so far to get here, and how can we do more of that? That's going to take you on a very linear path. But once you start to see those leaps in kind of the qualitative results in what you're producing, that's when you're going to start to see that exponential growth again. So you can talk about the idea that you can double your revenue by doubling the number of clients, or you could double your rates and serve half as many clients. When you start to get that balance of both, where you're maybe raising your rates and you're starting to kind of get more clients, that's when you really start to see that hockey stick take off. So all in all, or in conclusion, I'd say 10x, it's about quality over quantity. It's not about doing more of the same stuff. It's about doing that stuff better. And it's about identifying the 20% of the behaviors or the activities that are producing the majority of results, and then delegating that 80%, those day-to-day tasks that someone else can do. Of course, you're going to have to trust them. There's going to be a leap of faith to do that, but that's going to be kind of required. You're kind of shedding that old self so you can kind of grow into this new future self that you're trying to become. That also allows you to get outside the picture so you can see the frame and kind of get into those creative spaces where you can start to come up with new solutions to these problems that you're solving for your clients or for your business that maybe you weren't able to do when you're constantly being dragged into the minutia of the day to day. So that's the other benefit of kind of getting yourself removed from some of that, because it gives you an entirely different perspective and a different angle from which to come up with some creative solutions. This is also how you get that non-linear growth, right? So ultimately, that's what we're all going for. I mean, if you just want to stay on the steady Eddie path, that's fine. But if you're looking to actually scale your business and build something that's going to exist after you, it's going to require changing the way that you do things, typically, right? Maybe your case is a little bit different. So in all, it was a good read. These guys have written a lot of other books together. I suggest checking out this one, obviously. I'll put the link in the description. Checking out some of the other books that they've written. If you have read this book, I'd love to hear what your opinion was or what some of your takeaways are. So feel free to put in the comments. We can have a little conversation around what you thought. I mean, obviously, I have more takeaways than just these three, but for the sake of time, I just kind of want to focus on these are my three main takeaways. These are my thoughts on those takeaways, but that's just scratching the surface. So definitely pick up the book, read it, come up with your own opinions, and let me know what you think. Thanks a lot.